Hi students, and welcome to today's live IELTS class. My name is Adrian and I'm streaming to you live from beautiful Budapest here in Central Europe. I hope everybody is having an excellent and productive week so far. This is a members chat class. Viewers joining in, you do have to be a member to join the chat. The join button is beside the subscribe button on the channel. The materials come from our websites, aehelp.com for academic IELTS, and for the general version of the exam, check us out at gieltshelp.com. That's general IELTShelp.com. All right, just a reminder, everybody, we do have a new speaking interview video with a candidate from India on our channel. You can check that out. Roshni, Kunte, good to see you in class. This is your request, your task 1 request. Hi, Alexander. Hi, Kisi. So, Roshni, this is your task 1 pie chart request for this class today. Again, for all of our viewers, to get our premium courses, join us on our websites. This is aehelp.com. Click that big red button to join us for lots of video lessons, fully interactive course, and 6 original exams. This is the general version of our course. Click that big Join Now button to join us there. Students, if you have questions about the IELTS exam, or about our products, don't be shy. Send us an email. Send it to me directly, Adrian, A-D-R-I-A-N, at aehelp.com, and I will do my best to answer your queries. You can get our exam books from Amazon in paperback or digital version. Just search for AE Helps Academic IELTS or GE Helps General IELTS. Today, again, focusing on task 1, and in 90 minutes, a little bit less, we will look at a listening section, practice, and example. Okay. Thanks, Roshni. Yes, this is my lemon-colored or maybe a canary yellow, I don't know, shirt. All right. So, there it is. Task 1 IELTS, requested by our member, Roshni Kunte. One of the nice perks for being a member is you can request classes. Hi, Hung, Kisi, Hung, Alexander. Don't forget, you can request classes. Amarjit. Send me emails, send me requests. Okay, so IELTS Task 1 for the academic graph, chart, or diagram. You should spend about 20 minutes on this task. Always spend 20 minutes, no more, no less. You should spend 20 minutes. The pie charts below show the proportion of waste produced by different Australian cities and the main types of waste. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Write at least 150 words. That means if you want to get a band 9, it has to be a minimum of 150 words of good quality writing. Band 9 essays, students, they're usually closer to 200 words for task 1. Okay? It's very, very difficult to get a band 9 with just 150 words. Okay, any mistakes and it's not going to be a band 9. Hi, Danish. Okay, so let's take a look at these graphs. Roshni, can you tell us where you got this question from, just out of curiosity? I mean, as everybody will see, this is quite colorful. In the real IELTS exam, you will not have this kind of color. In the computer-based version, perhaps, but not in the paper-based version, simply because they don't print color on paper. It'd be even more expensive. So you don't see colors, you see shades or lines. But for this purpose, we have some colors. Roshni, I'm a little bit curious where you got this from, and I'll explain in just a moment where or why. Okay, so here you can see the title of the pie charts, Australian Rubbish Production. And then here in the legend, this is called a legend, for those of you who don't know, legend. Okay. Whatever describes the map or the graph is called a legend. So we have Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, Brisbane, and other cities, okay, in different colors. And then here we have types of waste produced. We have paper, plastic, food, metal, and other. The reason I'm asking Roshni to tell us where he got this question from is because, why? Why do you think? So, yeah, so Roshni says, I got this from a free tutor conducted in Candleburn City. So from a tutor, from a free tutor. I thought so. Why? Students, why do you think that this IELTS question is not, so it's not from a real exam? Why? It's a good question, members. So what's the difference between this? It's very close. It seems like it's from a real IELTS exam, but I could tell that it's not. Why is it not from a real IELTS exam? How do I know that? There's actually two reasons. Alexander says, okay, they're colorful. Yeah, the colors, that they definitely give it away, but there's another reason. Okay, so okay, all right, let's say that there's three good reasons. One, that they're colorful. Although in the computer-based exam, you might have color now. I'm not sure. I'll have to check into that with our partners. We are partners now with British Council in Saudi Arabia, so I'll have to ask them if they use colors now in the computer-based exam. Okay, so this is not a true academic IELTS Task 1 question because, number one, yeah, sure, it has color. What do you think is another reason? No, it could be Australia, Hung, so it can focus on any country. Yeah, Roshni, very good. So Roshni has a great answer. I'm glad that you realized that, Roshni, probably looking at this a little bit, is that the two pie charts are not actually interrelated with each other. Okay, so what Roshni is saying is that this pie chart is not truly related to this pie chart. So you cannot make a connection between what you see here and what you see here. So this pie chart simply describes the rubbish production per city and this the type of waste produced. But you can't guess which is which. Let's say that instead of this title, type of waste produced, we had type of waste produced in Melbourne. Is that the biggest one? Sydney. Sydney is the biggest one. So let's go with Sydney. So if this title was type of waste produced in Sydney, let's just imagine for a moment that we change the title of this pie chart to type of waste produced in Sydney. Now we can make a connection between these two pie charts because here we have Sydney. So we can say that Sydney here is 56%, which is more than half of the Australian rubbish. And we can look at that proportion in more detail. But it doesn't say that. Okay, it doesn't say in Sydney. So in the real IELTS exam, there is I want to say always. I'm a little bit careful to use that word always, but as far as I have seen, there's always a connection between the charts, graphs, tables that are given, and you have to discuss that connection. We don't see it in this example. Okay, so we don't see a relationship, a clear relationship between these two pie charts. Do you understand what I mean by that, members? It's very important that this point is clear that I just expanded on, that Roshni highlighted. So these pie charts are not clearly interrelated. In the real IELTS, Task 1 questions, there is always a relationship between graphs that you must highlight. Okay. All right, so Roshni says, yes, that's clear. Kisi says, yes, that's clear. Alexander, Zainab, Danish, Amarjeet, is that clear, what I just mentioned about the connection between the two pie charts and how it works in the real IELTS exam? Okay, thank you, Alexander. It's very important for me that that's clear for you, because that could be the difference between a 0.5 band in your writing score. So that's really, really important. Amarjeet, if you're here, let me know that that's clear for you as well. Okay, Hung, same thing. Oh, Hung, you said it. Okay, never mind. I see that. Amarjeet, good. Okay. So, and there's another reason. So there's another reason when I look at this, I can tell that this is not from a real IELTS exam. The final reason, the third reason, is that it's a bit too simple. Okay, so usually in a real IELTS academic exam, the pie charts will be a little bit more complex. So when you have pie charts like this, it will usually not be 2, but it will be 3 or 4 pie charts. Okay, it's very rare that they only have 2 pie charts. It's usually 3 or 4. If it's 2, then it's likely that they'll be much more detailed, and there will definitely be a connection between the two pie charts. So that's the third reason. Okay, so is this a bad question? That's my next challenge for you to answer. Is this a bad task 1 question? So IELTS task 1, the pie charts below show the proportion of waste produced by different Australian cities and the main types of waste. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting on the main features. Make comparisons where relevant. Is this a bad question to practice at home? Hopefully, some of you, while the lag is catching up in the video, are thinking, nah, it's not bad. It's an okay question. Okay, you can learn from this question, absolutely. Okay, the idea with some study materials is to start you off easy. Okay, so begin easy and then build your skill and your technique and your English to more difficult questions. Okay. So if you cannot write a good essay for this question, you will definitely have difficulty writing a good essay for a more complex official task 1 question. So it's okay to practice with easier questions. Just make sure that you do realize that you're dealing with an easier question than the official IELTS. So it is a good idea to practice with easier questions so that you become confident in your analytic and expository English skills. However, it is very important that you recognize the difference in the difficulty or in the level of the question. Okay, that's the key here. So it's a good question to practice with, and that's why I decided to do it for this class. All right, so let's start off then and write the essay for this. Of course, we begin with the first paragraph. What's the first paragraph? What is the first paragraph? It is the overview. Now, there's a lot of confusion these days, I think, from various sources and teachers, that there's an introduction and an overview. That's not true. An overview is an introduction. It's an expository essay. There's not two here. It's just one. Okay. Yeah, Danish, you should practice many different types of questions. And again, it's okay to start easy. Just make sure that you do eventually practice the same difficulty. Okay. And the overview, as Roshni is saying, is paraphrasing with details. Right. So let's paraphrase this sentence here. The pie charts below show the proportion of waste produced by different Australian cities and the main types of waste. So paraphrase that question for me to start the essay, the overview. Okay? There are the pie charts again. It's 5 cities. Okay? It's 5 types of waste. All right. Still waiting for those paraphrases. Students, this is my paraphrase with some details. So these 2 pie charts depict the ratios of garbage created by 4 major cities in Australia: Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, and Brisbane, as well as the types of refuse: paper, plastic, food, and metal. Notice how I did not include the category of other. It's very insignificant, and I decided to just leave that for simplicity's sake. Okay, they're very small proportions, and so I excluded that for now. I can include a sentence about that later in the essay, but it's not a main feature. It's not overly important. Okay. Hung says the 2 pie charts depict the percentage of 6 different waste products like paper, plastic, food, metal, and other in 4 major cities: Sydney, Hobart, Brisbane, and Melbourne. Hung, that's very good. Okay, that works. You paraphrase with some different words, right? The original uses proportion. Okay, instead of proportion, I use the word ratio, and Hung used the word percentage. They all amount to the same concept in this case. Okay, so that was good, Hung. And Hung, what's really good about your first sentence for the overview is that it doesn't have mistakes. It's clean. That's what you want for your first sentence in task 1 and task 2. It's really important to have that good first impression with a clean, clear sentence. Okay. Roshni says the two pie charts illustrate the percentage of rubbish produced by 4 Australian cities and other, while the variant types of waste generated are paper, plastic, food, metal, and other. Okay, again, it's okay that you included the other category. It's a bit tricky to put other in there because it's a bit awkward. If you do write the word other, Hung and Roshni, you might want to write it like this. Okay, in the single quotation, so that it's clear for the reader that other is a category in this case. Otherwise, it's confusing what that actually means. So this is a place where you can use this kind of punctuation, this single hyphen, this other. Okay. All right. Kesey says these two pie charts represent the percentage of garbage produced by Australians who are from different cities and the type of rubbish production. Kesey, that's okay. So you're paraphrasing nicely. You're lacking a little bit of detail, so I would definitely throw in maybe the cities and the types of garbage, especially or when you have such a simple pie chart as these two. Okay. Alexander says difference among Australian cities in garbage and types of predominant waste such as paper, plastic, food, and metal are depicted in these two pie charts. Alexander, it's not bad. You're taking a different approach. I can see that you're reorganizing your sentence structure, which is it's good practice. However, careful in the real exam, Alexander, to not be overly tricky or overly clever because you have quite a few mistakes in there and that will drop your scores. So make sure, Alexander, that in the real exam you're using a very clean sentence, especially for this first, very first couple phrases of the overview. Okay, so here, are we done with our overview? So is that it for the overview? Are we done? While you give me that answer, I'll read Zainab in Danish. Danish says, the two pie charts illustrate the ratio of waste generated by 4 cities in Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, and Brisbane, and also the types of garbage like food, plastic, and metal. Danish, good. Make sure you capitalize city names, Danish. Okay? City names are proper nouns. And if you write Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, and Hobart with small a, m, s, and h, that's 4 mistakes. Okay, they will count that as 4 mistakes. So you have to write those capital A, M, S, H's, Danish. Otherwise, you will lose band scores. Zainab says, these two pie charts illustrate the percentage in 4 towns in Australia of 6 garbage, paper, plastic, food, and metal. Okay, Zainab, you have a little bit of awkward syntax there. So these two pie charts illustrate the percentage of garbage produced in 4 towns in Australia, such as paper, plastic, food, and metal. That would be much better, Zainab, okay? Careful, it's awkward phrasing, all right? Okay, so Roshni and Kesey all agree that no, we're not done yet. Okay. All right, Danish, I got it. You're practicing in mobile phone. So we need to discuss the most prominent feature, right? So what can we see? What is the most observable feature at first glance, just looking at these two pie charts? What do we notice right away? What do we see right away? Well, I'm sure that you'll figure this out. It's not rocket science. This isn't university statistics. You can see here that 64% of the waste produced is food. It's very, very obvious. And here we can see that 56% of the rubbish produced in Australia is from Sydney. Okay. These are obviously fictitious, by the way, as well. I would highly doubt that Sydney produces half of the waste in Australia. It's possible, but I kind of doubt it. Okay. All right. So let's write about that. So food and Sydney. Okay. So create a sentence about that. Again, keep it simple. So at first glance, there, that's all. Okay. So at first glance, it is very clear from the two large slices, okay, the two large slices in the graph, that Sydney produces the most waste in Australia, and the greatest proportion of garbage is food. Okay, that's it. That's all you have to write. And that is a Band 9 overview, okay, as long as there are no mistakes. So these two pie charts depict the ratios of garbage created by four major cities in Australia: Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, and Brisbane, as well as the types of refuse: paper, plastic, food, and metal. And take out other. At first glance, it is very clear from the two large slices that Sydney produces the most waste in Australia, and the greatest proportion of garbage is food. Here's a nice paraphrase for Australia, for those of you who'd like to know. In the land down under, as Australians will often refer to themselves as well. So at first glance, it is very clear from the two large slices that Sydney produces the most waste in the land down under, and the greatest proportion of garbage is food. All right. Again, practice your paraphrasing. Students, when you're practicing this at home, I highly, highly suggest going through your task 1, task 2 essays several times, correcting your sentences, paraphrasing words that are repetitive. So really just improving the overall quality, okay? Work on that. Alexander says, observably, it is absolutely clear. That's kind of redundant, Alexander. I would just go with it is absolutely clear or observably, not both. Careful with redundancy, students. Careful with phrasings where you're just kind of repeating the same idea. So Alexander, I would just go observably, the most garbage is produced in Sydney, while food takes the most, while food makes up the majority of Australian waste. Okay, so Alexander, a little bit of correction there to make that better. Alexander, I'll read both. I'll read your original, and then I'll read how I would write that, and then you can make your own judgment on which one you think works better. So, observably, it is absolutely clear that the most garbage is produced in Sydney, while food takes the most part of Australian waste. Or, it is absolutely clear that the most garbage is produced in Sydney, while food makes up the majority of Australian waste. Okay, that's how I would write it, Alexander. Kisi writes, Obviously, Sydney is the major city which produced the most rubbish. As well, food has the greatest ratio for waste production. Okay, Kesey, again, a couple of corrections there, so note the difference. All right. Roshni says, clearly the massive amount of waste produced by Australia is from Sydney. Moreover, the majority of waste is food, which can be noticed from the large slice. Okay, something like that, Roshni. The end of it is a little bit weird there. All right, so good. We have our overview. Now, of course, we need to write our body paragraph. So we need to analyze. So this is our analyses. Plural. It's the body paragraph. Okay. And of course, before we can do that, we need to look at these pie charts, and we need to kind of look at it and observe it in more detail, figure out the main points, and how we're going to present those main points. Okay? So what should I start with? What should be my point number 1? Okay, while you tell me that, I'll read Amarjeet and Hung's end of the overview. So Amarjeet says, notably, there is no doubt that Sydney is Amarjeet, same feedback as for Alexander. You're kind of doubling that beginning. Either notably, Sydney produces the largest quantity of garbage, or there is no doubt that Sydney produces. But notably, there is no doubt is kind of a doubling of the same idea. Notably, it's like, wow. There's no doubt. It's like, wow. So you don't need to go, wow, wow. As you can probably feel, that's a little bit awkward for the reader. So just one wow. Okay, students, just one wow, not two. So Amarjeet says, notably, Sydney produces the largest quantity of garbage, and food is the main component of rubbish. Hung says, apparently, Sydney created the most garbage of all cities, Hung, and the most waste is food. Yeah, okay, good. Roshni says, let's start with the biggest. Kesey says, the most and the least. Okay. Kesey, I don't know about the least. I think the least is awkward here because the least in the type of waste is other, and the least in the city is Hobart, but that's very close to other. So I wouldn't really go with that. I definitely think focusing on the biggest slice makes sense. Danish says highest or biggest. Roshni agrees. Yeah, and I would probably start with cities. Okay. And then I would talk about the type of waste. Why? Because there is no connection. Okay? Since there's no connection between these two pie charts, not clearly, we just talk about one first and then the other one. We don't talk about them together because they're not really interrelated. So for clarity, it's best to just discuss cities and then discuss types of waste. And with this, it definitely makes sense to talk about Sydney first. So I would talk about Sydney first, then talk about Melbourne. And what else should I do for point 2? Maybe talk about Brisbane as well. Okay. Melbourne and Brisbane are relatively close. They're 5% apart, but we can discuss that in just one sentence. And then we can discuss other and Hobart as point number 3 because they're relatively close. So this is 56%, this is 18, this is 13, this is 7, and this is 6. Okay? Does that make sense? Roshni, you can definitely still have enough points for a 150-word essay here. Okay? In fact, I'll be honest with you, students, a person who studies graphs and charts could probably tell you 150 words just from one pie chart, even just looking at this, comparing Melbourne to Sydney or comparing all of these together to Sydney. So there's a lot of different comparisons that you can make looking at a pie chart, but here we don't need to overdo it. What can we say for this 56%? What's the correct term to use? When you're doing this, you should recognize this right away. So when you're marking your points, you should recognize the terms that you will be using right away. Okay, you should be able to hear me now. Correct me if I'm wrong. Just had to switch out the batteries in my transmitter for my wireless mic. Do you have sound now? Yes, everything's good? All right. Sounds like you can hear me. Perfect. Okay, good. So back to the question I was asking. What should you say about the 56%? So how can you report that? How should you report 56% in the essay? What are the exact words that you're going to use? In that sentence. Alexander says half. Roshni says over a half. Yeah, or more simply, Roshni, just over half. Okay, it is over half. So 6% is more than 5% over half. So Alexander, I would go over half, especially for the purpose of this essay. Okay, so let's do this, ladies and gents. Let's start writing the sentences for these points. Okay, let's do it together. I'm going to erase the markings because I think it's quite intuitive. It's quite clear. Okay. And you can start writing the sentence. So we'll catch up to each other once I get there as well. Okay, here we go. So when observing the Now, when you don't have a lot of information, when it's not complex, you might want to include some numbers as well. If you have a lot of information, then be careful not to give too much attention to specific numbers. But if you were to only have two pie charts like this, you could include at 56%. Don't write the word percent in either case, just use the symbol. So when observing the cities in more detail, Sydney produces over half of all garbage in Australia at 56%. Okay. Now, number 2 is Melbourne and Brisbane, right? So I'm going to write about that point. Go ahead, members, just keep writing at this point. I'll read your sentences as they come up. So okay, so that's how I would describe my point number 2. A distant second, because obviously 18% is very far from 56%, so a distant second is Melbourne at just under a fifth of all garbage. Okay, 18%, 2% less than 20, that's a fifth, right? And close after that is Brisbane at 13%. So 18, 13, not too far away, especially relatively to Sydney, Australia. Okay, Roshni says, looking more closely at the first pie chart, it is evident that Sydney generates over half of the rubbish in Australia. Yeah, Roshni, that's not bad. Roshni, there's a lot of different ways to write the word rubbish: garbage, refuse, waste. Make sure you're paraphrasing throughout your task 1. Okay, especially for a word like that. That will definitely help your band score go higher. Kisi says, when looking in more details, when looking at more details, Kisi, I would say is better. Sydney occupies over half of the waste. Occupies in this case, Kisi, I don't think is the best word for the context. Produces, creates, makes, maybe even manufactures. At 56%, which is more than triple of the next city, which is Melbourne, at 18%. Okay, Kisi, yeah, that's an interesting point to note. It is more than triple that of Melbourne, so fair enough. It's a good comparison. All right, so we have, so definitely we want to compare within graphs, right? And now I have my point 3, which is the 7% by other cities and the 6% by Hobart, right? So I want to write that in one point. Again, members, keep writing. I'll keep checking back on your sentences, okay? Okay, so there's my sentence. Other cities in Australia and Hobart create 7% and 6% of the total waste respectively. So again, just keeping that really simple. It's not a very interesting major piece of information. Because these are such simple pie charts, I can summarize this in a short sentence as such, okay? And now I'm done with my first pie chart and I can move on to my second one, all right? Okay. Hung says the first pie chart represents Sydney consists of the most rubbish produced, taking up 56% of all cities. Yeah, Hung and Roshni, both of you stated the first pie chart, right? So while it is true if we're reading from left to right, this is the first pie chart. But if we are, for example, somewhere in the Arabic world and we're reading from right to left, or even in China, Kisi, I'm sure you'll agree, we go from right to left, top to down, then this would be considered the first pie chart. So there is no number. We don't see a number 1 here and a number 2 here. So first and second are kind of arbitrary, okay? And it's not terrible to write the first pie chart, but it's unnecessary because if we're talking about Australian cities creating garbage, we know that we're talking about this pie chart. If we're talking about the type of waste produced paper, we know that we're talking about this pie chart. So you don't necessarily have to emphasize that. If they were different, like let's say these are Australian cities here, and then we have another pie chart with different Australian cities, then we might want to start allocating names for the pie chart, such as first and second. But in this case, you don't need to. Okay, it's better to avoid that. You want to minimize referring to the actual picture in your writing as much as possible. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Dana says, it is true that Sydney generates over half of the garbage of all cities in Australia, while Melbourne is just 1/5. The other cities like Brisbane, Hobart, and others produce 13, 7, and 6 respectively. Danish, you have an information mistake there. You need to write the other cities, Brisbane, others, and Hobart produce 13, 7, and 6 respectively. Hobart produces 6% Danish. That's why you have an information error there. And that would count as a mistake. So information mistakes are mistakes, okay, especially in the academic version of the exam. Careful. And yes, Danish, they will catch it. Just like how I catch it, they will catch it too. Okay? They're very familiar with these task 1 questions, especially once they've read 15 essays. So to them, it'll just stick right out when there's an information mistake. Amarjeet says Melbourne is slightly less than 18%, while Brisbane is over 10% production and garbage. Amarjeet, nah, that's awkward. Okay, over half, less than a fifth. But Amarjeet, it's not good to reference over or under a specific percent. Then just name the percent. So Melbourne is 18%, while Brisbane is 16 or 13% in producing garbage. So when you're, Amarjeet, when you're naming the specific percent, don't say less than 10%, unless you're looking at a bar graph where you can't see the exact height of the bar graph. But for a pie chart, Amarjeet, name the exact percent. Okay. All right. So now I can go to pie chart 2 and discuss the different proportions there. 64%, how should I name that? So what should 64% be in my writing? How would I, for 64%, how would I call that? Or how would I word that in my essay? Alexander, careful, careful. It's much more than over a third. Yeah, Roshni, that's right. Almost 2/3. Yeah, nearly 2/3. Okay, so that's right. Yeah, Amarjeet, it's good to try new ways, especially in this class, because you'll get my feedback. And I did do master's level statistics in university, so I'm fairly familiar. I've seen a lot of pie charts in my day. So it's good to test it, but again, you don't need to write it that way, Amarjeet, or you shouldn't, okay? The correct way that is Roshni. Roshni said almost 2/3, or another way is nearly 2/3. Okay, so nearly 2/3. Nearly 2/3 of the garbage, okay, or the refuse, is food. Okay, what's another way to write food garbage? What would be another? What would be another way that we might be able to word that so we're not using the word food, food, food? Anybody? 1/6 Danish is definitely wrong. 1/6 would be 18%, 15, 16%. So Kesey says nearly 2/3 of the disposal or uneaten food. These days we refer to food scraps as organic waste. Okay, often. So observing the waste produced in greater detail, organic waste. So I don't want to repeat waste here, so I'm going to replace it with garbage. Observing the garbage produced in greater detail, organic waste makes up nearly 2/3 of the total at 64%. Okay, so I can do it like that. All right. Okay, so right about the second pie chart here, students, I'm going to do the same. Okay, now just a quick note. Notice how Melbourne is 18% and plastic is 18%. In the real IELTS, if you had a question like this, please don't make a similarity between plastic being 18% and Melbourne being 18%. That's just really awkward. That's a coincidence. It wouldn't make sense to state that as a similarity, okay? That would just be really awkward. So, all right. Just under 1/5 of the refuse is plastic, and just over 1/10 is metal. Paper and other wastes make up a combined 7% of the total. All right. So that is my analysis. Now, I can write a summary, sure. But with such simple pie charts, it's unnecessary. Okay? So a summary would just be awkward here. The key pieces of information are these two. Okay? And we've already noted that in the overview. Roshni says substance would be another, or sustenance waste would be another way to say food. Yeah, Roshni, sustenance waste would also be okay. Organic waste is often how we call it these days. All right, students, so here is the original question. I'm going to read this through once before we wrap up today. So the pie charts below show the proportion of waste produced by different Australian cities and the main types of waste. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Write at least 150 words. Here we go. Overview. These two pie charts depict the ratios of garbage created by 4 major cities in Australia: Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, and Brisbane, as well as the types of refuse: paper, plastic, food, and metal. At first glance, it is very clear from the two large slices that Sydney produces the most waste in the land down under, and the greatest proportion of garbage is food. When observing the cities in more detail, Sydney produces over half of all garbage in Australia at 56%. A distant second is Melbourne at just under a fifth of all garbage, and close after that is Brisbane at 13%. Other cities in Australia and Hobart create 7 and 6% of the total waste, respectively. Observing the garbage produced in greater detail, organic waste makes up nearly 2/3 of the total at 64%. Just under 1/5 of the refuse is plastic, and just over 1/10 is metal. Paper, other wastes make up a combined 7% of the total. And that would be your high band 9 essay for this question. Again, students, remember, this is a simpler question than what you should expect in your official IELTS exam. Those generally, especially the paper-based, has no color, okay? And there will be some kind of a relationship between the two pie charts or the pie charts. All right, everyone. Any questions, members, on that? For everybody else who's watching, in 30 minutes, we will do a listening section, strategy and practice adapted from our exam book 2, listening section 1 and 2. Kisi, Danish, Amarjeet, Alexander, great participation today. Roshni, thanks for the question. Any questions? Anything that's not clear? You're very welcome, Hung. You're welcome, Roshni. And remember, members, send us requests. We love to hear your questions. We love to address them, show them in class. So just send them to us, and we'll schedule them for one of our members chat classes. Kisi, so far so good. Glad to hear it. Have an awesome rest of your day. Hopefully I will see all of you in the next class in 30 minutes, listening sections 1 and 2. Bye for now. Make sure to practice. Amarjeet, send me an email if you're having trouble. Okay?